On the morning of October 12th, 2003, along the rugged, rain-swept coastline of Bella Coola, British Columbia, a heavy-duty twin-engine helicopter tore through the low-hanging fog. Suspended beneath its fuselage was a massive industrial-grade steel cargo net holding thousands of pounds of rotting silver and crimson flesh. More than 80,000 pounds of biological matter, 40 tons of dead, decaying Pacific salmon were being flown directly into the ancient, dense canopy of the Great Bear Rainforest. The local loggers and technicians on the ground watched in silence as the aircraft vanished over the tree line, leaving behind only the deafening roar of the rotors and a mystery that gripped the remote community. No one outside a small, tight-knit circle of field biologists knew exactly why this massive payload of death was being deliberately dropped into the heart of a pristine forest, or what catastrophic consequence they were desperately trying to prevent. What followed this bizarre aerial operation was something absolutely nobody predicted. It was a biological phenomenon so sudden and so profound that it stunned the veteran researchers overseeing the project, triggering a cascade of ecological events that scientists in Vancouver and across the globe still discuss with a sense of profound awe. My name is Thomas Vance, and this is the full arc of the Great Salmon Resurrection. By the time this story concludes, you will understand three specific things. First, you will see how the absolute death of one species is the literal, physical architect of another. Second, you will discover the hidden, invisible network that connects the deepest depths of the Pacific Ocean to the tallest mountaintops of the Pacific Northwest. And third, you will realize that the traditional boundaries we draw between the land and the sea do not actually exist. But to understand the true magnitude of this experiment, you have to start with something entirely unexpected. You have to start not with the fish and not with the forest, but with the microscopic chemistry of ancient barren soil. For millennia, the terrestrial ecosystems of Western Canada have been locked in a quiet, desperate struggle against starvation. The heavy, relentless rains of the Pacific Northwest, while beautiful, present a severe ecological challenge. They wash over the landscape, constantly leaching vital nutrients out of the earth and sweeping them away into the ocean. Because of this continuous drainage, the soil beneath the giant conifers is naturally starved of two of the most critical elements required for life: nitrogen and phosphorus. Without these elemental building blocks, a forest cannot truly thrive, it merely survives. This fundamental scarcity was documented extensively in a landmark study published in the journal Ecology in 1999. Which demonstrated that the productivity of these coastal ecosystems was strictly limited by the availability of marine-derived nutrients. The trees were locked in a slow-motion battle for growth, constrained by the very rain that sustained them. For decades, traditional botany viewed the forest as a closed system, a kingdom that relied solely on its own soil and sunlight to grow. But that is not what happened. In the early 2000s, a team of pioneering ecologists began to notice a strange anomaly. When they analysed the chemical composition of certain ancient trees situated deep within the old-growth groves, they found something that defied conventional logic. Embedded within the annual growth rings of trees that stood miles away from the coast were massive concentrations of nitrogen-15. This is a heavy, stable isotope of nitrogen that does not originate on land. It exists almost exclusively in the deep marine environment, accumulated over lifetimes by creatures that feed in the open ocean. The discovery, later verified in a comprehensive report in the Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences in 2001, sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The trees were, quite literally, made of the ocean. The grand old-growth giants were functioning as massive reservoirs of sea-borne chemistry. Yet, the mechanism of this transfer remained shrouded in mystery. Scientists knew that millions of salmon returned to the rivers each year to spawn and die, but they assumed the nutrients remained confined to the riverbeds. What they found next changed everything. The researchers realized that the salmon was not just a fish, it was a keystone species, an ecosystem engineer of unparalleled importance. Every autumn, millions of these creatures act as a biological conveyor belt, gathering the vast wealth of the Pacific Ocean and carrying it upstream against the impossible pull of gravity. They are swimming packages of pure fertilizer. However, a fish cannot walk into the woods on its own. For the nutrients to leave the water and enter the soil, a bridge was required. That bridge was the large apex predators of the region, the grizzly bears and the coastal wolves. As the bears forage in the shallow streams, they capture the migrating salmon, carry them deep into the surrounding forest to feed in safety, and consume only the most energy-dense portions, such as the brains and the eggs. The remaining carcasses, amounting to nearly 70% of the fish's total weight, are cast aside onto the forest floor. There, an army of insects, fungi and microbes breaks down the remains, melting the ocean's nutrients directly into the root systems of the towering western red cedars and Sitka spruces. It was a beautiful, ancient and perfectly balanced loop of nature. Nobody expected what came after. By the turn of the century, human intervention had fractured this ancient cycle. Decades of overfishing, commercial logging, habitat destruction and dam construction had caused salmon populations across British Columbia to plummet to historic lows. In some river systems, the annual runs did not merely decline, they vanished entirely. With the disappearance of the fish, the bears stopped entering the forests to feed, and the invisible conveyor belt of marine nutrients ground to a sudden, devastating halt. The consequences were immediate, though subtle at first. The forest began to grow quiet. The vibrant canopy grew thin, the undergrowth became sparse, and the overall vitality of the ecosystem began to wither away. The land was starving for the sea. It was during this period of ecological crisis that a group of determined conservationists and government biologists decided to attempt something radical, something that had never been tried on such a massive scale. If nature could no longer deliver the salmon to the forest, then humanity would have to haul the salmon into the woods themselves. They gathered 40 tons of salmon carcasses from local fish hatcheries, fish that had completed their artificial spawning process and were destined for the incinerator, and prepared for the massive airlift. And here is where the story turns on a piece of pure luck. The logistics of moving 40 tons of decaying fish were a nightmare, and the initial funding for the project was so limited that the entire operation was on the verge of cancellation. But a chance meeting at a local aviation conference between the lead scientist and a veteran helicopter pilot changed the trajectory of the project. The pilot, deeply moved by the decline of the wilderness he had flown over for 30 years, volunteered his aircraft and his crew for a fraction of the standard cost, strictly to see if the experiment would work. With the logistical hurdles cleared, the team began the grueling process of distributing the heavy carcasses across selected test plots deep within the forest, marking the trees with precision instruments to measure the long-term impact. They knew the nitrogen would enter the soil, but they expected the process to take decades to show any visible sign of change. As the experiment commenced, a new emotional angle emerged that the researchers had not fully anticipated. This was not merely a clinical, scientific endeavor, it was an act of profound historical and cultural reconciliation. For thousands of years, the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, including the Heiltsuk and Nuxalk nations, had understood this profound connection. Their oral histories spoke of the forest and the river being a single living organism, bound together by the spirit of the salmon. Modern industrial civilization had spent a century treating the river as a resource to be fished and the forest as timber to be cleared, entirely blind to the delicate thread that tied them together. The collapse of the salmon runs was not just an ecological disaster, it was a threat to the cultural survival of the human communities that had guarded these lands for generations. The antagonist in this story was not a singular villain, but rather the collective arrogance of human management, which assumed it could dismantle an ecosystem piecemeal without causing the entire structure to collapse. The 40 tons of salmon dropped from the sky represented a humble admission of that mistake, a desperate attempt to pay a debt long overdue. But the biggest surprise was still to come. The true payoff of this monumental effort began to manifest just 24 months after the helicopter completed its final drops. When the research teams returned to the test plots to analyze the data, they were met with a sensory explosion that defied all scientific precedent. The forest had not just absorbed the nutrients, it had violently erupted with life. The very air in the test plots smelled different, rich, damp, and charged with vitality. The visual transformation was staggering. In the areas where the 40 tons of salmon had been deposited, the growth rate of the western hemlock and Sitka spruce trees had accelerated by an astonishing 300% compared to the control zones. Tree rings that had been thin and compressed for decades suddenly expanded into thick, robust bands of growth. The trees had literally exploded in size, shooting skyward with unprecedented speed. The physical landscape had completely transformed from an empty, silent woodland into a dense, chaotic paradise of green. The undergrowth was thick with huckleberry and salmonberry bushes, their leaves massive and vibrant, loaded with heavy clusters of fruit. The silence of the forest was replaced by a deafening chorus of songbirds, drawn by the sudden explosion of insect populations that thrived on the decaying organic matter. Large mammals returned. Black bears and grizzlies walked through the lush vegetation, their fur thick and healthy, attracted by the abundance of foraging opportunities. The numbers told a story of absolute restoration. Measurements revealed that the trees in the salmon-treated areas were absorbing up to 70% of their total nitrogen directly from the ocean carcasses. The dead fish had become the living wood. The boundaries between flora and fauna had dissolved entirely, proving that the forest was not merely a collection of trees growing in soil, but an extension of the ocean itself, fueled by the pulse of the sea. What began as a desperate, artificial intervention revealed a timeless truth about our world. It showed that life is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous, flowing current, where the end of one journey is the precise beginning of another. In the grand design of the cosmos, the death of the fish in the cold waters of the Pacific was the exact mechanism required to give birth to the giant trees of the emerald canopy. The forest and the sea are two halves of the same beating heart, bound together by a memory written in the very chemistry of the earth. We are not separate from this network, we are its keepers, and what we choose to return to the land is precisely what we leave for the generations that follow. What are your thoughts on this profound connection between the oceans and our forests? If this story shifted your perspective on how nature heals, consider subscribing to accompany us on our next journey. My name is Thomas Vance, and I thank you for listening.